Dhaka, capital of Bangladesh. Just to the east of the old city, near the presidential palace, there's a roundabout, and in the middle is a giant statue of a water lily blossom, the national flower of Bangladesh. Traffic snarls around it. On the southeast side, there's a grey 12-storey office block. It's the kind of boring building you could plonk down in any city in the world and it'd fit right in. But this is a very important building in Bangladesh. It's the headquarters of the country's central bank. It's where they manage the precious currency reserves of a country with millions of desperately poor citizens. And high up on the 10th floor, away from the traffic noise, there's a computer printer.
It's just a normal printer, but it's the location that's important. It's in the most restricted area of the bank, in a small room with a glass panel along one wall. Only a handful of employees are allowed in because this is where the bank's computers connect with the world's financial system. Every day, millions of dollars flow in and out of accounts, thanks to messages sent and received by the machines in this room. And the printer faithfully records it all on paper.
And then it stops. It's 8:45 a.m. on Friday the 5th of February 2016. We've all had printer problems, and the duty manager that day, Zubair bin Huda, thought the same thing most of us do. He later told police in a statement that such glitches had happened before. So we assumed, he says, it was a common problem, just like any other day. But this isn't like any other day. Far from it.
By now, it's 11 a.m., and it's just about time for Friday prayers. And Zubair bin Huda, he has plans for the afternoon, so he and his colleagues agree to look at the printer again the next day, because at this point, the printer malfunctioning doesn't really seem like a big deal. But when he gets back to work the next morning, the printer, it's still not working, so he and his colleagues seek permission to find another way to reboot the machine. And he tells police that's when they started receiving the messages.
As the printer springs to life, a backlog of messages appears. Urgent requests for clarification. They're from the New York Federal Reserve Bank, where Bangladesh Bank keeps a foreign currency account. The New York Fed's worried. They've received instructions, apparently from Bangladesh Bank, to drain the entire account, nearly $1 billion.
$1 billion with a B. And they were asking them, why did you send these billions of dollar transactions? It was a very scary situation.
That's cybersecurity expert Rakesh Asthana. He's the first person outside the bank to investigate the incident. He says at first the staff were confused by the messages coming off the printer.
What the hell are they talking about? Because we haven't sent these transactions. So it must be an error on their part.
Panic ensues as bank employees try one method after another, emails, phone calls, even fax messages, to try contacting the Fed in New York to stop those transactions. But no one is responding. And meanwhile, $1 billion are draining away.
They don't know it yet. Bangladesh Bank's in the middle of the most daring cyber theft ever attempted. Their attackers have spent years practicing for this moment. To spirit the money away, they'll use fake bank accounts, charities, casinos, and a network of accomplices across 3 continents. It's like something from a film. Almost as though a bunch of hackers have watched a Hollywood heist movie and thought to themselves, we could do that.
It's almost unheard of, unbelievable, but it was also terrifying because it threatened the entire financial services. So at that time, I just saw the entire financial markets grinding to a halt.
From the BBC World Service, this is The Lazarus Heist.
I'm Jeff White.
And I'm Jean Lee.
Episode 4, $1 Billion Hack.
In the days following the digital break-in, the bank is at a loss to work out what went on. They know the money has left their New York account, but they can't figure out how it happened or whether the transfers can be reversed.
That's when Rakesh Asthana gets a phone call. He's driving back to Washington, D.C. from a security conference.
And the governor of the central bank was on the line and requesting urgent assistance on a delicate matter. And he said, I'm sorry I can't tell you on the phone. Just get on the plane and come and join us. We need you.
Rakesh knew the head of the bank's governor, Atiyah Rahman. They used to work together. Now Rakesh runs a tech security firm called World Informatics.
So I did tell him, like, look, I need to get my visa, I need to book my tickets. He says, oh, don't worry about the visa, it's already arranged at the Bangladesh embassy, just go there and get it and travel.
So Rakesh gets to Dhaka within days, where he's immediately briefed.
And it dawned on me the enormity of the security incident.
But as far as the bank chief is concerned, the money transfers are just errors, and the problems can be ironed out.
The governor was very perplexed, and he thought that a mistake had been made and some transactions had gone to the wrong bank or not wrong account, and we would get it back. It happens in normal circumstances. A lot of time transactions go to the wrong account and they have to be reversed out.
As a result, the Bangladesh bank chief keeps the hack secret, not just from the Bangladeshi people, but also from his own government. He keeps the raid on Bangladesh Bank under wraps for weeks, as his officials try to get the money back, and for this, they need Rakesh to work out what happened.
And our team was given a conference room right next to the governor's office, so we could advise him on many of these issues. And initially, it was a very small group that had knowledge of this incident, and I could not speak to anybody outside.
The first thing to establish is whether the New York Federal Reserve has made a mistake, and the answer comes back loud and clear: absolutely not. The Fed insists someone from within Bangladesh Bank ordered the transactions. So the bank then suspects an inside job. Maybe someone snuck into the computer room overnight and made the transfers. So Rakesh sits down and watches the security tapes, all 8 hours of them.
And there was nobody in it, and there was only one shadow, as we found. It was a cleaner outside the room, but there was nobody in the room for this whole 8-hour period when this attack took place.
An empty room, no one goes in or out, yet somehow $1 billion is stolen. Rakesh and his colleagues start to focus on the computers themselves, and one set in particular, the machines that run a system called SWIFT.
The SWIFT system, and that's the glue that binds this whole financial systems together.
So right, we need to take a minute to explain what SWIFT is, because it's a huge part of this story.
To explain, when I'm being paid by a client in a foreign country, I'll give them my bank's SWIFT code so that our banks can communicate directly and securely for them to make that payment. You know, to me, it's just a combination of letters and numbers.
Basically, SWIFT is sort of like hyper-secure email for banks. They can message each other and send requests for payment. There are other messaging networks for banks, but SWIFT is the big one.
SWIFT messages authorize billions of dollars in transfers between banks, including Bangladesh Bank. It may seem strange that a bank would transfer such enormous amounts of money on the basis of a simple message from another SWIFT user. But we should point out that to send a SWIFT message, you have to be inside a bank. It's not like you or I can just install it on our home computers and send messages demanding millions of dollars.
So put yourself in the mind of a hacker looking for money. And just imagine how much you could get if you could hack into a bank's SWIFT system. Sure, it's incredibly secure, and banks themselves are very well protected, but all you need is to find a weakness somewhere. And, well, you're in the money, aren't you? And that's exactly what happened at Bangladesh Bank. Rakesh and his colleagues start to find evidence that hackers broke into its SWIFT system and made close to $1 billion of transfers.
And Rakesh finds out something else. The timing of the SWIFT transfer orders is no coincidence.
Imagine you're going to rob a bank. Drill under the walls, break in from the roof, something like that. You want to give yourself the maximum amount of time to do it, right? Maybe a weekend. How about a long weekend? The hackers raiding Bangladesh Bank have done something way better. Here's how it works.
The attack was conducted on Thursday, February the 4th, and it's important the dates and time. It occurred from 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. in the morning in the non-business hours when nobody's there in the building.
As Rakesh says, the attack starts on Thursday evening Bangladesh time. But think about it. The account where the bank's US dollars are actually held is at the New York Federal Reserve Bank, thousands of miles from Bangladesh, where thanks to the time differences, it's Thursday morning. Plenty of time for the Fed to act out the hackers' wishes.
And there's something else playing into the hackers' hands. In Bangladesh, the weekend runs from Friday to Saturday, not Saturday to Sunday as in many other countries. So as the New York Fed is busy transferring the money, Bangladesh Bank's headquarters in Dhaka are winding down for the weekend.
So you see the elegance of the attack. They did it Thursday night with a very defined purpose. When Friday, New York is working, Bangladesh Bank is off. By the time Bangladesh Bank comes back online, FRB is off. So it delayed the whole discovery by almost 3 days.
And the hackers have yet another trick up their sleeve to buy even more time. Once they transfer the money out of the New York Fed, they need to send it somewhere. So they wire it to accounts they've set up in Manila, the capital of the Philippines. And guess what Monday, February 8th was in the Philippines?
That day happens to be the first day of the Lunar New Year. It's a huge national holiday across Asia, including the Philippines. So when the Bangladesh Bank tries to contact the bank in the Philippines, asking them to block the transactions at their end, everyone is off and the transfers go through. By juggling the time differences in Bangladesh, New York, and the Philippines, the hackers have engineered a clear 5-day run to spirit the money away. And thanks to holidays and weekends, the different bank schedules are all at odds with one another. So even when they discover the hack, they struggle to communicate quickly enough to stop it.
By this point in the investigation, it becomes clear to the Bangladesh Bank officials that the transactions can't just be reversed. The money has actually been transferred to the Philippines, and to get it back, they'll have to get the country's help. The Philippines authorities tell them they need a court order to do that. Court orders are public documents, and so when Bangladesh Bank files its case, the story goes public and explodes worldwide.
As soon as we got out, there were 300 crews of TV, cameramen, reporters outside.
Bangladesh Bank hackers installed a malware in the
Bangladesh Central Bank security system.
La Banque centrale du Bangladesh dans le
extraordinary story from Bangladesh where a cyber
cibernetico en su cuenta de la Reserva Federal.
The Bangladesh government finds out, and they are not happy.
Now, of course, the finance minister was furious, and he actually told the governor that how dare you not inform me, because this is of national importance.
The bank chief tries at first to defend his actions at a press conference.
You all know that recently an accident happened. It was more like a terrorist attack, like an earthquake. At first, I couldn't understand who did it and how this catastrophic incident happened. I even brought experts from abroad to ensure that our economy doesn't collapse.
But in the end, it isn't enough.
He was asked to resign. I never saw him again. That was the day when the mood turned really gloomy and dark. 2 of the deputy governors were fired. A whole list of people who were involved had been let go. And there was complete gloom and doom. It was like a morgue.
I was leaving Congress and going to the airport and reading about the heist, and it was a fascinating, shocking incident.
Carolyn Maloney represents New York's 12th district. This is an area that covers most of the east side of Manhattan, including the world's largest central business district and the corporate headquarters of major media, entertainment, banking, and finance firms. Actually, she was my congresswoman, and the detail I love most about her is that she's a black belt in Taekwondo. In Congress, she sits on the committee that deals with financial services, so she knows the banking industry, and cyber is an issue she's been studying. So the cyber attack on the Bangladesh Bank scared the wits out of her.
A terrifying incident, probably one of the most terrifying that I've ever seen for financial markets.
She's got a lot of respect for the New York Federal Reserve. When she finds out it had authorized payments close to $1 billion, almost the entire contents of the Bangladeshi's account, she's got questions. Well, actually, she's got one really big question.
How in the world did this happen? The New York Fed usually is so careful. How in the world did these transfers happen?
So she asks the Fed for an explanation, and they reply. It turns out they have spotted the suspect transactions.
The gang who hacked Bangladesh Bank was so close to getting their hands on almost $1 billion. It's a meticulously planned operation which, so far, had gone like clockwork. But then there's just one tiny detail. It's always a tiny detail, isn't it? That puts a big fat spanner in the works. The heist has gone sideways.
The hackers have broken into Bangladesh Bank's SWIFT system and made transfers totaling $951 million US. Almost all that money is going to accounts in the Philippines. Those accounts are at a bank branch in Manila on Jupiter Street.
There were hundreds of banks in Manila that the hackers could have used, but they chose this one. And by pure coincidence, that decision would cost them hundreds of millions of dollars. That's because the transactions the hackers made...
They were held up at the Fed because the address used in one of the orders included the word Jupiter, which is also the name of a sanctioned Iranian shipping vessel.
Just the mention of the word Jupiter was enough to set alarm bells ringing in the Fed's automated computer systems, and
the red flag caused the Fed to review the entire batch of payment orders, and a quick thinking New York Fed staffer noticed that something about these payment orders didn't look right. I think what these questions showed is that the system could be hacked, because what caught it, it wasn't the stealing, but that the Jupiter was a sanctioned Iranian shipping vessel. They could have stolen $1 billion.
Thanks to that tiny detail, that one word, the heist starts grinding to a halt. The New York Fed stops most of the 35 transactions, but not all. 5 transactions, worth just over $100 million, get through at this point.
Not what the hackers were aiming for, but it's still a huge blow for a country where 1 in 5 people live below the poverty line. Bangladesh's ambassador to the Philippines, John Gomez, summed up a lot of Bangladeshis' feelings.
I'm terribly shocked that this money earned by our hard-working farmers and the workers, it is their money, and it's the poor people's money, it's the workers' money, so that's why it hurts us more.
This is the bit you don't often get to see in those glamorous heist movies, the real-world impact. The money that's been stolen doesn't belong to some rich bankers or wealthy companies, it's the government's own funds, and they're vital in a country like Bangladesh.
Every dollar matters in Bangladesh.
Dr. Nazim Ahmed is an economist at the Bangladesh Institute of Development Studies.
Because now we have still 20% of our population, people, they are poor. So we need to utilize every money that we have for the development of people's life.
The Bangladesh bank heist, she says, couldn't have come at a worse time for a country where many people still don't have a bank account.
Therefore, it's very important that we have a very well-trusted, well-developed financial sector. And there, if you have this kind of an incident, that breaks the whole trust on the financial system.
And while Bangladesh Bank may have been the most high-profile, it was far from being the only bank hack where the SWIFT transfer system had been targeted. Around the same time, big institutions around the world were being hit for hundreds of millions of dollars. Ecuador, Guatemala, Vietnam, Nigeria, South Africa. The globe was lighting up with attacks, all carrying the fingerprints of the same gang.
And that is a big worry. You may not care about an obscure bank transfer system being attacked in countries you may never visit, but Congresswoman Maloney points out that the consequences of these attacks reach far beyond just you or me.
If you can't trust the SWIFT system, then the whole financial system breaks down. Markets run more on trust than capital, and this undermined the trust in international payments. And if you can't trust the security of international payments, then international commerce would absolutely stop. And that would be catastrophic. It would undermine the entire world economy.
It's worth mentioning, by the way, SWIFT have done a lot to tighten up security since all this happened. They now try to share information between banks so they can spot such hacks. And we should also mention we approached Bangladesh Bank, its former governor, Atiyah Rahman, and the New York Federal Reserve for interviews, but they all declined. As the impact of the heist became clear, the Bangladeshi police and government launched investigations. But 5 years on, they still haven't published their findings. Meanwhile, as more people get involved in unravelling the hack, Rakesh Asthana realises
it's going to be much bigger than what I could handle. And I called upon our strategic partners, FireEye Mandiant, and they became our partners in this full investigation.
And other cybersecurity companies joined the effort, and they're all trying to answer the same questions.
How on earth did one of the most important institutions in Bangladesh get hit? Banks are supposed to be secure, and the national bank should be impregnable. How did the hackers get in?
These attackers basically have no fear, to be quite frank. This is very much part of their playbook and motivation. They are willing to do anything and aren't afraid of the repercussions.
That's Eric Chen. He's a technical director at Broadcom's Symantec, one of the world's leading cybersecurity firms. In other words,
I spend most of my day basically hunting down hackers.
And he's been hunting them for over 20 years. Of course, back in the day...
You know, when I first started, we were mostly looking at things that were just being written for fun. Hackers trying to just pop up their name, like their username on your screen, a little bit like graffiti in the real world.
Well, things have certainly changed. Investigating government cyber attacks is now run-of-the-mill for him. And as a leading researcher for a big tech company, Eric Chen manages to get hold of some of the digital evidence from the heist. Tech firms often share information with their trusted contacts to see if they can assist.
As he unpacks the hack, Eric starts to see the bigger picture. The hacker's ultimate target was to take over the bank's Swift computers and use them to transfer money. But those computers are well protected. So first, the hackers went after lower-hanging fruit.
They were doing things like using LinkedIn and Facebook to find employees of the bank that they could basically trick into opening an email. Just random back office employees.
Recognize those tactics? Yep, it looks a lot like the techniques used to break into Sony Pictures Entertainment back in 2014.
In this particular case, the kind of person they were looking for was someone who would be willing to hire a new candidate. In the end, they had sent maybe a couple of dozen emails to a variety of Bank of Bangladesh employees with a supposed resume. They made up a persona, a guy named Razal Alam.
I'm extremely excited about the idea of becoming a part of your company, and I'm hoping that you will give me an opportunity to present my case in further detail in a personal interview. Here is my resume and cover letter. Thank you in advance for your time and consideration.
And then he provided a link to basically a zip file. And in that zip file, it contained a document. But when you opened up that zip file and that document, it actually contained malicious executable code that would begin running on these people's machines. In the end, at least 3 Bank of Bangladesh employees had attempted to open and download that malicious file.
So the hackers are in. Well, kind of.
The very early days, you have to remember, this is January of 2015. And remember, the actual final attack doesn't happen until 2016, a year later. And what they need to do is they need to move from those computers to ultimately their target, the Swift terminals. They spend the better part of that year basically just jumping from one machine to another. So they have access to a machine. They basically dig on that machine for additional credentials, other users, other usernames, passwords. They then use those credentials to say, hey, what machines are connected to this machine? And they just try those credentials and try to jump from one machine to another. And they repeat and replay that over and over again.
So again, they're sort of feeling their way through, grabbing a password here, using that to get to that computer. That computer gets them to another computer and sort of crawl through the organization, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest risk is obviously being found out. They try to be as stealth as possible, try not to be uncovered, right? So they're slowly jumping from one machine to the next. And actually, as they're even moving through the organization, they were cleaning up behind themselves.
It's sneaky stuff. Once they've hopped from a less important computer to a more important one, they no longer need access to the first one. So they wipe their viruses from it, making their progress harder to track.
So at any given time, even though over time they might have infected, dozens or even 100 different machines, they might only actively be on a couple of machines. And, even in the Bangladesh case, it could have been the case that their info security team may have seen, oh, this machine was infected. But then they might have said, oh, it's cleaned up now. Okay, let's move on. Not realizing the attackers were actually still in their network.
Eventually, almost exactly a year after having sent that first email, they reached their goal.
The first time they got to actually the Swift terminal was in January 29th, 2016. And once they got onto these Swift terminals, their goal was to make multiple million-dollar international transfers.
And they could do just that. But there's a problem. The hackers realised that Bangladesh Bank records all of its Swift transfers on its computer system. That's a big issue, because if a bank employee spots a dodgy transaction,
they could potentially block them or revert them. They could send SWIFT messages to tell the other bank, hey, cancel this transaction, revert the funds, please.
Obviously the hackers don't want their SWIFT transfers to be reversed, so they have to delete the digital records so there's no trace of them at Bangladesh Bank.
And in order to do so, they needed to hijack the software. And while understanding how to do that would have been difficult and took them weeks to reverse engineer that software to figure it out, ultimately, in the end, they had to basically just change 4 characters.
That's right. In the end, to cover up all digital traces that international transactions worth millions had taken place, all they need to do is change 4 characters in the code.
It's astonishing. I mean, in the films, it's screens and screens of, green text on a black background, furious typing of code. And yet this is what fascinates me. It all came down to sort of those 4 lines of code in what will probably be thousands, right?
Yeah, I mean, the software was super sophisticated, and it took them a long time to understand it. But once they found that little magic place, that magic place was literally 4 characters.
But there's one final problem. You know how a lot of people just don't trust computers? They always like to have paper copies of everything printed out just to make them feel that little extra bit secure. Bangladesh Bank is no exception. They have a backup for the digital record of SWIFT transfers, the computer printer that churns out paper confirmations.
The SWIFT terminal software would actually send to the printer a hard copy printout of every transaction that occurred. And so the attackers basically needed to bypass all the printed out copies of the transactions.
So the hackers took that little printer out of action.
Every time that the printer tried to send a printout to the printer, they would simply overwrite those print jobs or those files that contain content to print with simply zeros, so nothing would print. So instead, there was all this blank paper in the printer.
You know, in the heist movies, when the thieves take over the surveillance cameras and make it look like nothing has happened in the vault? Well, this is the digital version.
With the traces covered, the heist was set to go. By now, the hackers have discovered that Bangladesh Bank has an account at the New York Fed and that it contains almost $1 billion. All they need to do now is transfer that money, and they can do so by sending transfer requests to the Fed using SWIFT.
But when the Fed receives the transfer requests, it gets suspicious. Why is Bangladesh Bank trying to empty its account?
And they sought clarification from Bangladesh Bank by sending these SWIFT messages asking, what is all this? Nobody sends $1 billion in a day.
But remember, the printer that is supposed to print out those SWIFT messages from the Fed has been taken out by the hackers, so all it's printing are blank pages. So the bank staff doesn't even see the Fed's urgent appeals.
Until Saturday, when they finally fixed the printer.
And lo and behold, they started seeing all these clarification messages that had come from Federal Reserve Bank of New York. And they were asking them, why did you send these billions of dollar transactions?
But by that time, the Bangladesh Bank staff...
they were not able to contact FRB on Saturday because they are now on a weekend.
Making this one of the most daring bank heists ever.
We had never seen a sort of attack like this that had transferred so many millions of dollars. This was a huge first. No one in their right mind, no cybercriminal we had ever seen before, had tried to transfer $1 billion from a bank. It was astounding.
News of the Bangladesh Bank hack also starts to filter back to the FBI team in Los Angeles. They're still investigating the attack on Sony Pictures. By this point, they've already linked that hack back to North Korea. But more than a year later, the FBI is still putting together the puzzle pieces, hoping to identify the individuals who carried out the hack so that they can charge them with the crime.
And so when the bank heist hits the news in March 2016, the FBI starts digging back through the evidence from Sony to see if there were any similarities. The hackers had used email addresses as well as Twitter and Facebook accounts to attack the film studio. So the FBI had got search warrants to get access to those Twitter and Facebook accounts and so on, about 1,000 of them. That means the FBI can now see the messages that have been sent, and they come across some striking links.
There were some accounts that were used to both target Sony Pictures and conduct reconnaissance and target Bangladesh Bank.
At this time, Tony Lewis is Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Central District of California, and he's helping the FBI assemble a case against the hackers.
There were connections sort of between accounts used for each of those things, but there were also some accounts that themselves were used to target both of those victims.
Remember that email from Razal Alam, the polite job hunter who approached Bangladesh bank staff with his resume? That email was sent from yardgen@gmail.com, one of the same Gmail addresses used to hack into Sony. And that's just one of the key links between the two cases, leading Tony and his team to believe the same gang was behind both jobs.
The Lazarus Group, North Korea's elite hacking unit. Through his own research, cyber analyst Eric Chen also concludes that the regime is behind the Bangladesh bank heist.
Most of the nation-state attacks we see have to deal with espionage, geopolitical issues. Here we have a nation-state who are just trying to steal cold, hard cash. Never seen that before, and we still have never seen that since from any other nation-state.
We put these allegations to the North Korean consulate in London, and in a letter, Ambassador Che Il told us that his country denies the allegations made by the United States and others. He called them a farce. And he also told us that the ulterior motive of the US was to tarnish the image of states they dislike, such as North Korea, with all sorts of slanders and disgrace, as they put it.
As the FBI digs deeper into the network of email accounts used in the Sony and Bangladesh attacks, they come across an incredible lead.
One of the really significant moments in the investigation was when we were looking through some of the email messages that we'd obtained.
During the Sony investigation, the FBI had come across a company based in China that seemed to be functioning as a front for North Korean hackers. Among the clues was the fact that the company's email accounts had been accessed from internet addresses inside North Korea. The FBI now found a message from one of the front company's bosses talking about a couple of employees, software developers to be specific.
And there was a description of one person sort of rotating out of work at this company and another rotating in. That person rotating in was Park Jin-hyuk.
Park Jin-hyuk, it's a pretty typical Korean name that wouldn't raise any eyebrows in North Korea or South Korea. But for the FBI investigators, the name lit up like a Christmas tree. That's because the name was at the center of a giant web of email and social media accounts, all interlinked. It had been used to register many of the accounts and also appeared in many of the messages sent and received from them. And it was from this web of accounts that the phishing emails had been sent out to Sony and Bangladesh Bank, emails that would go on to cost these victims millions.
Park Jin-hyuk, the FBI had learned, was a key player in the Lazarus Group, North Korea's government hacking unit. He'd set up and run many of the email addresses and social media accounts used to target the group's victims. And now, as the FBI looked deeper into the email his boss had sent about him, they found some staggeringly detailed information.
Accompanying that email was essentially his resume. It had his name, where he went to school, what languages he spoke, what computer languages he was proficient in, his birthday, so the sort of biographical details that really showed this was a person.
There was something else attached to Park Jin-hyuk's resume. His photo. I'm looking at it now. It looks like a classic passport shot. It's face on, flat lighting, blank background. And in it, he looks a bit like I do when I get my passport picture taken, like the camera's drained all the emotions out of my face. This, according to the FBI, is the true face of all those fake accounts used to hack into Sony and Bangladesh Bank. He's Anderson David, he's John Mugabe, he's Razal Alam. The FBI says they're all the same guy, Park Jin-hyuk.
It really put a face to all of the investigative work that we had been doing.
In the picture, he's wearing a brown suit jacket, a smart black striped shirt, his hair's neatly cropped. Honestly, he doesn't look that bad. Could this guy really have done all the things the FBI believes of him? If so, does he know the damage he's caused? Maybe to him, it was all just a job.
Who is this person who goes by the name Park Jin-hyuk, and is that really his name? How did his life lead him to this point, and how do people like him become some of the world's most dangerous computer hackers in a country where, frankly, most people can't even get online?
That's next time on The Lazarus Heist.
The Lazarus Heist is an original podcast from the BBC World Service. I'm Jean Lee.
And I'm Jeff White. And our producer is Estelle Doyle, with original music from Magnus Fiennes and Lee Il-woo from the band Jambonai.
We would love to hear your feedback, so if wherever you get your podcast allows, please do leave us a rating and a review.
Remember to subscribe as well so you don't miss any of our future episodes. The story's going to get even wilder.
We'd love for you to spread the word on social media. You can use the hashtag Lazarus Heist. Our website is bbcworldservice.com/LazarusHeist.
Thanks for listening.